Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast, Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and an emerging people leader, thus a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and opportunities.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. Today we're talking about Season 5, specifically Leadership Triage, the impact of blame, influencing in challenging times, and expressing your why in words and actions. Let's jump in.
Okay, so we're in Season 5. A lot of new characters are being introduced, a lot of different dynamics, and now we're really starting to see some more political type dynamics. So we're in Episode 3, Escape from Altura. What were some of your takeaways?
So at the end of the last episode, obviously there was that large sort of explosion. And then now we kind of fall in on the aftermath of that, right? So them caring for the wounded, etc. Some people are becoming talkers. And one of the things that stuck out to me immediately was you have two sort of key leaders in this situation. You have George and you have Estes. And George is being very focused on the people, right? Versus Estes, who's more like, we need to get to the bottom of this. And, this was an attack and everything. And I thought it was just like a really great look at like a good leader versus a bad leader, in where George's focuses on the people. It was, look, things are going not great right now. We got that, but things are going to still go not great. Let's worry about our people first. And I think that sometimes, I've been in organizations and worked with folks who kind of lose sight of that a little bit, that let's focus on the people right now because we can't undo the bad that's happened. We can't change that situation right now. Let's focus on what we can control and what matters most, which is the people. So I thought that was a really great little point, because hers was also far more focused on it kind of a broad term, but like she was focused on the helping the people, where he was focused more on like almost revenge or getting who caused the problem. Doesn't matter. Problem was caused. Let's deal with what we can deal with right now. Let's deal with the important things. So her priority was on the people versus his was on this arbitrary thing. So I thought that was a big one right in the beginning.
I agree. And I think that when a leader or a person in a position of authority is focused on blame, then you're right. They're not focused on the things that are important, which is the people who just went through this traumatic thing and getting them to the other side of it. And what I really love about George here too, is it just reminds me of like a lot of the things that are happening currently in the job market, where there's just a lot of companies who are doing layoffs. And so there's that uncertainty, not only for those people who now have to find something new, but also for the people still within those organizations who are like, am I next? Like, what's going on? So you see, like in this instance, there could be leaders or people in positions of leadership who are like, well, here's why they're not here. Right? Which not a problem. That doesn't help. Instead, to have more of that George perspective of here's how we're going to move forward. We can never know the future because the world is ambiguous, right? So I can't say this will never happen to anyone else. But what I can say is here's what we're doing well, and here's what we should focus on. And then when you can keep people, again, just kind of refocused on the things that actually matter, which, like you said, George is doing, is everybody okay? How are we taking care of each other? Do we have the resources that we need to do what we need to do right now? It can help draw people back in when they feel so, like the bomb at the beginning or at the end of the last one into this, or the explosion is just so symbolic of like these change things or these things that happen in organizations. And then what do you do afterwards? So I really like that you mentioned George there with just how she was approaching it, because businesses are run and they are successful because of the people that are in them. And if you have a bunch of scared people who lack psychological safety and are just waiting for the next explosion to happen, your business is never going to be able to move forward.
Yeah. It's funny because then what you have throughout that episode is now you have Estes, who's sort of, he's taking advantage of that negative and just finding a group to blame. And so that's another thing where it I've seen it happen before, right? So whatever your sort of work environment is, or whoever you're working with, but like, oh well, this didn't meet the deadline because the devs, right? Or like, I know the number one thing that people blame is the help desk, right? So it's always like, well, I could get that, I called the help desk and I got the ticket in with them, but they haven't done it yet. So it's like, is that passing the blame thing and then using that as your anchor and just your get out of jail free card for everything? So I also think, it's something I try to be aware of myself, of not falling into that trap of like just allowing somebody to have that crutch or that like anchor excuse of it's, well, I called the help desk and that just becomes this acceptable answer. I remember when I was in the military, it's kind of like it's always like, oh well, the administrative shop, right, for the paperwork and stuff, it was a general acceptance that they were the worst and terrible, and that's why things weren't working. And 9 times out of 10, it was people never submitted something, right? It wasn't that the office lost it; it was that they didn't do it. But it's just this blanket accepted excuse. But now not trying to get, he's not trying to find a resolution. He's found an escape path that he can just lay all these failings on, right? So that's, I think, a common thing that you see with bad leaders as well is, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything. And I think even in, he's giving a speech and he presents it as like this is my fault because I let these people do this thing. So it's like trying to fall on this fake sword and I just gotta fight $1 for every time I heard that. Be able to buy out Jeff Bezos.
Yes, I think that, yeah, people who are poor leaders do exactly all the things that you're saying. And it's also interesting where, let's not focus on moving forward. Let's focus on this witch hunt. That becomes very problematic. And you can get a passionate and aggressive group around you that make you think that, yeah, this is what we need to do. Do we need to figure out what happened? Sure. But at the expense of moving the group forward? Absolutely not. Right. So there can be this balance, but you need to lean into, again, like we've already said, how do we move this group forward? If along the way we're able to find out this other thing, great. But also, I think a lot of times in the workplace, you just have to accept that something is a failure or something didn't work. And we can spend a lot of time being all academic about it and breaking it apart and doing all that. But the effort that we're putting towards that is effort that's now not being put towards actually moving forward, towards the actual product or towards the actual people. And so we really need to find and strike that appropriate balance in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And when you were talking about like the whole witch leader thing or witch hunt thing, that was, yeah, that's a really great point and observation. So yeah, those are my big things, or that was sort of my big thing that I noticed there. And then something else, not to change the topic, but as we start to move on in the episode, so we have this Estes, right? He's blaming the talkers, saying that they're the ones who caused these problems. That becomes, rallies. Like, I think he says like quarantine them. So he's going to isolate those people. And now they're different from the group. So he's destroying the group dynamic that they built. Because he's saying, nope, those people are different. What I think is interesting is Murphy in this situation. He sort of tries to get away from it because he's like, oh, I've seen this before time and time again, right? They start to isolate people and you're on this group and you're in this group and all of a sudden you're on the out group. And so I think that's like, I've dealt with that a lot too, is like the sniff test, the gut feeling for me. I've been around, I've worked in a lot of different organizations. When stuff starts to look like it's going the way from like that past experience, I'm very ready to leave. And I think organizations do kind of like a bad job of managing stuff like that, or like, and so that I felt like a Murphy, and that it's very rare for me. But I felt for Murphy in that one because it's like, yeah, that's a good call. Things are probably gonna go weird. So, I think that's interesting because you have George who's trying to maintain that and saying, no, what we have is working. Like, don't let this one hiccup change our whole dynamic. And it's another big thing where sometimes leaders, one thing will go bad. So it's like the whole process is broken. We need to change it. It's like, nope, let's maybe just take a second. This was an anomaly, a blip. Let's not change the entire way we work and our entire management process just because one thing went poorly. Or, so it's like, or vice versa. You also have the people that something's clearly not working and they still won't change it. So fine line, I think, to walk. And do you know what do you consider to be the indicator for that, right? Like when is it time to change? When is it time to try it again? Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right. So I'll answer your question first, and then I'll go back with some additional thoughts about what you just said. So I think I'm going to give you the worst answer ever. It depends, Corey. But I think it really does, because here, I'm going to step back a little bit to what you were saying about some of your previous experiences. And then also with Murphy, we come into these situations with professional baggage, and George is a good leader and she's a consistent leader, but Murphy is still traumatized by his past experience. So it doesn't matter how good George is. It didn't even matter how good Roberta was. There is still something in him that sees something, associates it with something in his past, and now he's in fight or flight. And that happens to a lot of people in the workplace. And so I think that so then now moving back forward, as a leader, like knowing your people, kind of seeing when they're in these different places, being able to talk with them, kind of the way George is attempting to. But when you see that many people under distress, I think that also you as a leader need to sometimes stop and be like, I didn't socialize this the right way. I didn't communicate this well. They don't understand this process, and moving through it is going to be me essentially picking every one of them up and carrying them up this hill to get them over. So do I need to stop and crush this and start over, right? We'll start over. Which pieces did work or which pieces were going well? Those are the pieces that we'll attempt to keep, in a new process. And then I think if you have something that is like established, it is incumbent upon leaders to always be assessing, does this work? And not from your perspective, because your scope, you have so many filters before information gets to you. Even though we love to think that the people who directly report to us feel free to give us feedback, they don't, right? If you have a lot of yes people, you have people who just aren't used to that. They don't know how to do that, or they don't know how to communicate it in a way that isn't, offensive. They'll just be like, we hate this, it's stupid. And you're like, not helpful. Like, I can't do anything with that feedback. I can't fix anything with that. So I think that for leaders, it's in really talking to people at all levels of your organization when they've gone through an experience. So let's say it's an onboarding experience and they go through it and they're like, yeah, this was exhausting. It was complicated. They're not going to tell you it's bad. But when you as a leader can listen to all those words that they're saying, that is their experience. That's what they're trying to tell you without telling you they hated it and it sucked. So they'll kind of use these other words. And I think that leaders need to always be asking questions around their processes, because maybe it truly doesn't work anymore. And that's fine. It doesn't matter who built it or how long it's been in place. If it doesn't work in 2023 or whatever year it is, it doesn't work. And that doesn't mean the process didn't work at one point or that it's bad. It just doesn't work right now. So that's when I think leaders need to also be willing and brave enough to say, I know you've been doing this for a long time. And I respect that. And thank you for following the process. We know it doesn't work. Here's how we know it doesn't work. Here are the things we can do to move forward. What else are you thinking? Right? So bring those people in so then they also feel like they're part of the process as much as is possible.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I think the including people where able to, yeah, that's another missing piece that I think, people do, especially like Warren and George, they do a great job of that too. Even towards the beginning of the episode with George, as people, after that explosion, people are becoming talkers now. And that's like, a shock to you as an individual, right? 'Cause it's transition from like human to zombie-ish. But then there's also like, you get those zombie cravings sort of immediately, which normally is resolved by those biscuits, but now they don't have a lot of them. And I think George like really does a great job of like talking through and saying, hey, this is what happened, but we're going to get through this and it's not that big of a deal. And so it's like she was able to take something that could go bad and really de-escalate that just by talking it through, saying, I see you, I understand what you're going through, or I can empathize. And, yes, that's a great point, that communication piece. So, because then the other big thing, I'm sorry, wait, do you have anything else?
Nope, go ahead.
Yeah, because as I say, the other big thing towards the end of this episode, there's an issue, right, where there's a zombie horde that comes in and they're already dealing with this conflict. And so it's Red, 10K, and Sarge. They sort of start to kind of get surrounded, and Sarge ultimately kind of gets taken over by the zombies, but you have 10K and Red that are sort of okay, right? But what I think Sarge realizes that her situation is sort of like hopeless, so she's willing. She makes a call to try to get as many zombies away from 10K and Red, and I think that's like she didn't pull everyone down with her, right? She didn't just give up and like let it happen to everybody. She did her best to protect them. Now 10K did get bit in the hand, and so Red, in the attempt to save him, right, kind of gets rid of his hand for him, and so that's a big shock, and deal with that a little later on. But I thought, like, let's say they start like, I've worked at places where it's like, I'm having a bad day, so you have to have a bad day too, right? Like, or this is going terribly for me, so it should go terribly for you as well. She was not like that. She's like, just, I'm having a bad day, sort of, not even like the oh, woe is me, martyr for the cause, just throw more stuff on there. It was like, hey, send it over my way. I'm already dealing with that. Don't you have to worry about it. And I think it's a great leadership thing too, right? So I like that. I don't know what your thoughts were.
No, I completely agree. And I love the way that you framed it here, because there's also the part where when I saw it, I was like, true Marine fashion, right? I will jump on this grenade to save my friends. I will do that. So I love that. But I really love what you said, where it's like, just because I'm going through something that's terrible doesn't mean I need you to get into this hole with me. You go do other things, right? You go do, it doesn't have to bring down the entire group. I really love that. I hadn't thought about it like that. So now you have me thinking about that.
Yeah. That was, like I said, I thought that was really interesting, because then now, because if, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but like kind of when we're going to that next episode, because the rest of the group, they're trying to figure out like some stuff and what's going on. So, they kind of come up with the idea for George to move in, or like, hey, we need to go check out Pacifica, which is where, some of the other folks are and stuff like that. And I think that gets, I think that gets interesting too, because they've dealt with all this like loss. There's a lot of these issues going on. They've shorted up the best they can, and they're going to continue on with their goals. You know what I mean? So I thought that was a great thing too. They had this issue that came up that wasn't part of what their plan was to execute forward. They've assessed, they've shored things up, they've made people as well as they can make them, and now they're going to move on. Because one of the issues is, right, that lack of biscuits, which I don't know if we've discussed it yet, but from a context perspective, right, if the talkers eat those, they stay as talkers and they don't turn into like zombies. But so I just think that that's a really key point as well, where you have a plan, things don't always go according to plans. You had something that goes bad, you shift those plans, right? You don't change it like a complete 180. You now just incorporate in whatever issues arose and add those towards that sort of goal moving forward. And I think that it seemed very agile, right? Very Scrum of them. And that's something that stuck out to me, was something else got added in. It's now a newer priority. It's not changing any of the other priorities. It's just shifting up towards the top a little bit more. So I thought that was a really, I thought there's a great reflection, because I think a lot of times when people hit that issue, they do this dead stop to like assess and evaluate what's going on, and they stop moving forward, solving nothing. You know what I mean? Just make it a more iterative process.
Yeah, I mean, in Stoicism, they say the obstacle becomes the way, right? So like the obstacle isn't necessarily something for you to stop and try to figure out a way to get around. that's now, it's not in the way, it's part of the way. You're going to use that as a way to continue to move forward.
I
And I
gotta write
think,
that down.
and I think another piece that really we're seeing a lot more in this episode, it kind of started in the previous one, but that's where Lieutenant Dante, who worked with George, and they were very close friends and, you know, essentially battle buddies. And in the last one, this whole explosion is being blamed on Dante. And a lot of the, and I say evidence so loosely, there's no real evidence. It's all circumstantial. But as they're presenting that, like, even though there's all this circumstantial evidence, George is like, I know this person. And so what I think is so interesting about this is it goes back to leaders knowing their people, so that you can advocate for them, so you can defend them, you know, in terrible situations. But also, as a leader, who do you fall on your sword for? Or do you just let it go? Because I'm not usually a big fan of falling on your sword for people. People make their choices, and then you know, help guide them through whatever those consequences are. I'm not saying you just abandon people, but at the same time, it was just such an interesting thing where George has so much integrity. And then she is like, oh, this person that she thought she knew so well, or that she knows so well, has now been accused of this thing. And she just is in also this place of, I need to move these people forward, but also I can't believe this other piece. And so as they're moving, you know, trying to go to Pacifica, they're looking for Lieutenant Dante. So it's just interesting because it kind of goes to the whole, you know, you never know what battle someone else is dealing with internally. And so she's, going back to your point, she's still able to move forward. There are all these things in the way, external and internal, but we still have to move forward. And I think that is something that people forget. Like, of course, we need to take time to care for our mental health and our physical health, but we still have to move forward. It's not, I need to protect all these days, I need to do this. Like, you have to move forward. You have to. Like, that's part of being a human alive in this world in general, but also, especially in the workplace, you have to be able to continue to move forward.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because the other thing too is once they show up to Pacifica, one of the other things I thought was interesting was I also viewed that as what is at Pacifica right now, which is a little bit more normal, right? There wasn't a big explosion. Things are running well. They've got a good community. That was something that a lot of the Bite Mark team folks didn't get to see, because when they came in, they were doing the elections. So that was not a facade, but it was like a party, but like a big thing. There's a lot of energy. It wasn't mundane, right? And then they had the explosion, which was, you know, bad, and then it was all done. So it's like, I think it was really great. Like, George was like, just as a reminder, this is what right looks like. Like, this is what we're trying to get as well. And so they went to sort of like an external team. And so that was a way for visually, physically, however you want to look at it, for George as a leader to be like to those teammates, this is the goal, right? This is the end state. Let me show you why we are doing these things, because they're going to get us to this point. And I thought that was very powerful. And I think that's something that a lot of good leaders have the ability to do, is sort of point towards those examples and then let people backwards plan how to get there themselves, right? So that was a big thing to me.
Yeah, and I like that, because people need to figure out how to get there on their own, like with it, because being forced into a process, you're just never going to get the buy-in or the support that you need. And I think that when they get to Pacifica too, it's a bit more combative than they were expecting, because they're also in that place of, there was this bombing, and now do we quarantine these talkers?
Yeah.
And I think that it also just goes to, like, feelings are more contagious than the flu. I know I've said it before, but it's so true, where, oh, there's this thing that happened and it's very scary. Somebody says talkers, all of a sudden that's who the enemy is, right? We need to feel safe and we need to feel under some kind of control. So let's do a witch hunt and find this person that will make us feel safe, whether that's the problem or not. And so it was, it's interesting when they kind of like walk into that, where it's like, And then that's when Warren and George are making that case for unity, for staying together, for not, segregating talkers and, regular humans. So, or I should say humans. And so the talkers are regular, they're just regular talkers. But I think that, they both really make this case in a way also that's supportive of one another. So again, Warren is so good at, and George now we see too, is so good at, like, we are a unified front. We believe the same things. You can trust us. If one of us isn't here, you can believe the other one.
Yeah, no, that's really key. So, sorry, I'm there. I just I lost my train of thought because you said something and I wanted to go back to it, but now I don't remember what it was. Say everything you just said again. No.
Play the tapes.
No, I'm kidding. So don't forget to like and subscribe. But yeah. So with them arriving to Pacifica and George, like you'd said, do we quarantine the talkers? Do we not? George's input is held in a high esteem there, right? So when she's like, no, right, come on, these people, they're good people. That I think is huge because I think she's from Pacifica originally, so to speak, but we don't know that yet. Or maybe we do. Yeah, she told us already. But she sort of went over as she's in Altora now, but her voice still carries weight. That's a big decision, right? You're talking about isolating an entire group of people, and she's respected enough to say that. And then we remember from I think it was episode 1 of season 5 where you do that flashback of Warren with George originally. She was a college student at the for the blacks or day 1 of the zombie outbreak type thing, and there's a professor that is talking with Doc and is saying all these things about he recognized that George was a leader. She kept everyone going very early on, and one of the things that reminded me of is she was sort of she was just a college student, right? He was a professor. So if you're looking at who's the leader, who's the follower, Barry Blanket, right? But it's obviously he should have been the one that was in charge, right? He's the leader, but she was able to illustrate and had those skills and abilities, and he recognized that and said he kept going because because of her, right? So he bought into her, and she sort of maintained that throughout. So I thought that was really cool because you never know what your web of effect is on people and how important that can be, because the way you treat someone, right, that it's just you always run into the same people kind of over and over again. So it's you got to be smart about what you're doing. I had a point there, I lost it halfway through, but good talk.
It'll come back to you. I think also that demonstrates just that the classic roles that we should fall into, we don't. Oftentimes we don't. In fact, most times we don't. And so just that professor having the lack of ego to be able to say, this person's the leader, I believe in them, I'll follow them. That is huge. Because I think there's the whole idea of the sage on the stage, the person who's the oldest or who's been doing something the longest, that's the de facto leader, when not necessarily. Maybe in some situations, sure, but not in all situations. I think I'm definitely also of the mindset that a leader can't lead. If you're a leader in one situation, that doesn't mean you can be a leader in another. And if somebody is not showing any leadership qualities in certain situations, it doesn't mean that they won't ever have any. So I think that, also with the position he was in, what a phenomenal opportunity to mentor and to create that space for her to figure out how to be a leader.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's the key thing about empowering people as well, and stepping out of somebody's way, right? That's a really great point.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, because I was just trying to think back too. They were building that family tree thing on the wall, right? And everyone was really impressed by that. And I just thought that that was a really cool moment because that was something that George had also helped to create, and she was sharing that with the Bite Mark team. And I don't know, it's like it was easier to like, if I was on that team, I would have already bought into the idea of like, let's make a Numerica thing. But it was like she's able to illustrate so well her passion and like why she wanted to do this and why it was important. And it was, I find myself to be the type too where um I'm a reader and a watcher, right? Like if as far as how I learn, how I absorb information, um, like she just, it was illustrated so well, but she already said that point before, but she was able to illustrate what her goals were as well. So it was like she shared the same information through a lot of different media or ways, and that's something I think too is like you don't have to just post up what your goals are on a wall or on a SharePoint site somewhere. Like sometimes you got to talk through them, and you can give those examples, and I think that's really key because people absorb that information in different ways. So it was, yeah, that was like a really great point too to me.
And I think something else you touched in there, that why are we so compelled to follow some leaders? And it is because they know how to tell you and show you what the why is. Their why, the why of the mission. People like George, people like Warren, they know how to express that in everything that they do, in their response to everything, and how they carry themselves. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that most people have is they don't understand their why. And I'm not saying that like everybody at this exact moment needs to know what their life purpose is, but there's this act of knowing yourself and really digging into like, why am I here? Why do I do these things? Why do I put up with the terrible things that I put up with sometimes, right, in different environments? Like, why do I do that? And so I think like, because it takes a lot of internal work, it takes a lot of ongoing work to really understand like, why am I here? What is my purpose? Who do I care about? What do I care about? And I think that when people really understand that and have internalized that and really understand themselves in that way, then you get the Warrens, you get the Georges, you get the Docs who are like, this is what's valuable to me. And it makes them easy to follow because they're consistent. Who they are and what is important to them and their why doesn't change because there's a new executive. It doesn't change because, they read a different article in HBR and now they have a whole new, like Lisa, these people know themselves and they know like at the core, like this is the thing that's the most important. And I think that's why George from the jump is a super compelling character.
That's such a fantastic point. I think the knowing thyself piece as well, because you also like Sun Mei on the like that, like whoop, like left turn, but also still there. Sun Mei is like really an individual contributor. She's doing the same thing, but like I think in this episode too, like she's really focused on finding the cure. She's really focused on looking at some of the um like her contribution to the group and the goal is like a more scientific one. It has nothing to do with like going out and the action packed zombie fighting stuff that everyone else is doing. She's running that independently. She's sharing that information. So I think that that's really cool because she's absolutely, in my opinion, she's a lone wolf as well as an integral member of the team, right? So it's like she is both very effectively. And I, I think that's what I want to be most of the time when I'm working with a group, except I always just end up being a lone wolf out in left field. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think that some of it's communication, but some of it, again, like you said, is George and Warren and everyone else being very clear with goals and making it easy for somebody who's not necessarily involved with the A plot and, is doing the B plot or the side mission, still 100% tying in and contributing always. So I think that that's really cool too. I don't know. Do you work with anybody, or have you ever worked with anyone in the past that's kind of like that vibe, right? Sort of always out there, but you like never see them, but everything they do is like super important to what you do. I've worked with one person that was like that, right? He was big brain kind of guy, and like everything he did was like, but nobody ever saw him, right? He was just sort of left alone. But that he wasn't a big people person. So I think about that too. Would have hated to have to like manage that.
And I think, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, yeah, I was done.
I love that you brought up Sun Mei here too, because if we look, the other thing too is like when a person has their why, it's also not at any cost, right? Because I don't like it when people, whatever it takes, at any cost. And it's like, well, now you're eroding the actual like what it is and the values that are behind like that core belief. So if we were to compare someone like Sun Mei and Dr. Murch, you have Dr. Murch who is not clear, who, you know, who does change at the whim of whoever's kind of in charge. Yeah, I know Murphy bit her. That's a different situation. But even before that, it was like the prison system, the CDC, this. So it was like she just shifted to whatever thing. So she couldn't be trusted. She was an entity that you couldn't trust. But Sun Mei, she wants to find a cure because she really cares about humanity. She doesn't just care about certain pockets of humanity.
Yeah.
And she'll protect the information because, like, and I know at this point now, Estes is like getting very interested in her research, and she's being very protective of what this thing is that she's trying to do. And she's not just like, oh, you're the person in charge. Here's all of the stuff, all of the information, whatever it is that you want. And so I think I'm glad you brought her up because I think that her and Dr. Murch, it's such an interesting comparison to what we were just talking about with the why, where it's like Sun Mei is very clear. She's been very clear since the moment she started working with that team, even when she was trying to communicate back to her home team and she was fighting with Addie about, you know, resources and how they were actually going to communicate. But she was like, this is my thing. This is what I'm here to do. And it's important to me. And here's why. And so, so I think that she is such a solid character. And you're right. She's a phenomenal individual contributor who is, no matter what, she is consistent in what her internal mission is.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. No. Yeah. I was just thinking like, yeah, that consistent in the mission. And I didn't really think about it. I had forgotten that she, you know, in the beginning when we first met her, when she came in with that team and everything, yeah, her whole process has not changed. She just found people that help enable her to get her job done. And she can also, you know, give take of helping them. They help her. I didn't even break her down like that. That's really interesting. She's remained 100% consistent.
Yeah, one of the most consistent characters on the show, probably ever.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Good stuff.